Get comfortable now. Let your body rest and allow your breathing to slow down. You don't need to focus on anything. Just listen and let this quiet evening gently carry you toward sleep. A quiet evening in a small town. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and rose. In the small town of Willowbrook, nestled between rolling hills and ancient oak trees, the day was gently surrendering to evening. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine from Mrs. Henderson's garden, mixing with the earthy smell of recent rain that had blessed the town earlier that afternoon. On Maple Street, the oldest street in Willowbrook, Emma Clark sat on her front porch swing, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. She had lived in this house for 37 years, ever since she and her late husband Thomas had moved here as newlyweds. The swing creaked softly with each gentle motion, a sound so familiar it had become like breathing to her. Emma watched as Mr. Peterson from across the street watered his rose bushes. He moved slowly, methodically, giving each plant the same careful attention. His garden was his pride, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it. The roses were just beginning to bloom, their petals unfurling like secrets being shared with the evening air. "Beautiful evening, isn't it, Emma?" Mr. Peterson called out, raising his hand in greeting. "Indeed it is, Harold," Emma replied, her voice soft and warm. "Your roses are looking particularly lovely this year." Harold beamed with pride, his weathered face crinkling into a smile. "The rain this afternoon did them good. Nothing like natural water to bring out their best." Emma nodded in agreement and took a sip of her tea. The chamomile was perfectly steeped, just the way she liked it, with a hint of honey that Thomas had always said reminded him of summer meadows. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the peace of the evening wash over her. Down the street, the old church bell tower stood silently against the darkening sky. In an hour, it would chime 6 times, marking the dinner hour as it had done for over 100 years. The bell's tone was deep and resonant, carrying across the entire town, a comforting reminder of continuity and tradition. Inside the Willowbrook Cafe, Sarah Mitchell was wiping down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that day. The lunch rush was long past, and only 2 customers remained. Old Mr. Jameson, who came every evening for his coffee and slice of apple pie, and young Timothy Ross, who sat by the window doing his homework while nursing a hot chocolate. Sarah glanced at the clock on the wall. 5:15. She had another 45 minutes before closing time, but she didn't mind. These quiet moments at the end of the day were some of her favorites. The cafe felt different when it was peaceful like this, less a place of business and more like a cozy living room where friends gathered. "How's the pie today, Mr. Jameson?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. It was always the same. "Perfect, as always, my dear," Mr. Jameson replied, his eyes twinkling behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your grandmother's recipe never fails." Sarah smiled. Her grandmother had opened this cafe 50 years ago, and the apple pie recipe had been passed down through 3 generations now. Some things, Sarah believed, were meant to stay the same. Timothy looked up from his textbook, his young face scrunched in concentration. "Miss Sarah, do you know anything about photosynthesis? I have a science test tomorrow." Sarah walked over to his table, her footsteps quiet on the worn wooden floor. "Well, I remember a little from my school days. It's about how plants make their food from sunlight, isn't it?" "Yeah, but I have to explain the whole process." Timothy sighed. He was 13 at that age, where everything seemed either impossibly difficult or unbearably boring. "You'll do fine," Sarah reassured him. "Just take it one step at a time. Breaking big things into smaller pieces always helps." Outside the cafe window, the town square was nearly empty. The fountain in its center bubbled softly, its water catching the last rays of sunlight and turning them into dancing sparkles. A few pigeons pecked at breadcrumbs near the benches, their movements unhurried and peaceful. Across the square, the town library was preparing to close. Margaret Walsh, the head librarian, was making her final rounds, ensuring that all the books were properly shelved and all the reading lamps were turned off. She had worked at this library for 23 years, and she knew every shelf, every corner, every creaky floorboard. Margaret paused at the children's section, smiling at the small cushions arranged in a reading nook. Earlier that day, she had read stories to a group of kindergartners, their faces lit up with wonder as she showed them pictures of faraway places and magical creatures. These moments reminded her why she loved her job. The library was quiet now, filled only with the subtle sounds of old buildings settling and the distant hum of the air conditioning. Margaret breathed in the familiar scent of books, paper, and ink, and the accumulated wisdom of thousands of stories. It was a smell she had loved since childhood, when her father used to bring her here every Saturday morning. She walked to the large window that overlooked the square and stood for a moment, watching the evening unfold. From here, she could see Mrs. Henderson tending to her jasmine plants, their white flowers glowing softly in the fading light. She could see the Johnsons' dog, Rusty, being walked by their teenage son, the golden retriever's tail wagging with contentment. She could see life moving at its own gentle pace, unhurried and peaceful. Margaret locked the library doors and began her walk home. She lived just 3 blocks away, in a small cottage that her parents had left her. The walk took her past the elementary school, its playground empty now, the swings moving slightly in the evening breeze. She remembered teaching her own children to swing here years ago, their laughter filling the air as they pumped their legs higher and higher. At the corner of Oak and 3rd Street, she encountered Father Michael from St. Augustine's Church. He was carrying a basket of vegetables from his garden, planning to deliver them to the widow Morrison, who lived alone and appreciated such kindnesses. "Good evening, Margaret," Father Michael greeted her warmly. "Closing up for the day?" "Just finished," Margaret replied. "Those tomatoes look wonderful." "The garden has been generous this year," Father Michael said. "I always grow more than I can use. It seems only right to share." They walked together for a block, chatting about small things: the weather, the upcoming town festival, the new family that had moved into the old Brennan house. Their conversation was easy, comfortable, the kind that comes from years of friendship and shared community. When they parted ways, Margaret continued toward home, her steps slow and contemplative. The sidewalk beneath her feet was familiar, every crack and uneven section a part of her daily landscape. She knew where the oak tree roots had begun to push up the concrete, where the Johnson children had written their names in the wet cement 20 years ago, their handwriting still visible, a sweet testament to childhood. Meanwhile, in the town's small park, elderly couples were taking their evening strolls. The Hendersons walked hand in hand, as they had done for 43 years of marriage. They moved slowly, not from necessity, but from a desire to savor each moment together. The park path wound through tall trees and well-maintained flower beds, past the old gazebo where summer concerts were held and where countless marriage proposals had taken place over the decades. "Remember when we used to bring the children here?" Mrs. Henderson said softly, gesturing toward the playground. "I remember you chasing after little Michael when he decided to climb to the very top of the slide." Mr. Henderson chuckled. "You were so worried." "He was barely 3 years old and fearless," she replied, smiling at the memory. "Now he has children of his own, just as fearless." They continued their walk in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only comes with deep familiarity and abiding love. Around them, the park was settling into evening. Birds were finding their roosting places, their evening songs filling the air with gentle music. A squirrel scampered up a tree trunk, its day's foraging complete. Back on Maple Street, Emma had finished her tea and was now tending to her window boxes. She had planted petunias this year, and they were thriving, their purple and white blooms cascading over the edges of the boxes. She watered them carefully, speaking to them softly as she did so. Thomas used to tease her about talking to plants, but she had read somewhere that it helped them grow, and besides, she enjoyed the one-sided conversations. "There you are, my lovelies," she murmured, adjusting a stem that had bent toward the street. "Drink up now. Tomorrow will be sunny again." The street lamps were beginning to flicker on, their warm light creating pools of gold along the sidewalk. Willowbrook had resisted installing the harsh LED lights that many towns were adopting, preferring instead to keep their traditional lamps that gave off a softer, more welcoming glow. Inside the houses along Maple Street, families were preparing dinner. Emma could smell pot roast from the Wilson house and something with garlic and tomatoes from the Martinellis. These were the smells of home, of comfort, of ordinary evenings that somehow felt extraordinary in their simplicity. At the end of Maple Street, where it curved into Birch Lane, young Daniel Cooper was teaching his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, how to ride her bicycle without training wheels. The training wheels had come off that morning, and Lily was determined to master this new challenge before bedtime. "Keep pedaling, sweetheart," Daniel encouraged, jogging alongside the wobbling bicycle. "You're doing great!" Lily's face was set in concentration, her small hands gripping the handlebars tightly. She had fallen twice already, but each time she had gotten back up, her determination unwavering. Now, she was beginning to find her balance, the bicycle moving more smoothly along the quiet street. "Daddy, I'm doing it!" she called out, her voice filled with excitement and wonder. "You are!" Daniel confirmed, gradually letting go and allowing her to ride on her own. "You're really doing it!" He watched as his daughter pedaled away from him, her confidence growing with each rotation of the wheels. These moments, he thought, these simple, perfect moments, were what life was truly about. Not the big achievements or grand adventures, but these quiet evening triumphs, witnessed only by a proud father and the lengthening shadows of a peaceful town. Emma watched the scene from her porch, smiling at the little girl's determination. She remembered teaching her own children to ride bikes, remembered the mixture of pride and fear as they wobbled away from her, venturing into independence one pedal stroke at a time. How quickly those children had grown, how swiftly those evenings had passed. Now they lived in distant cities with families of their own, but they called every Sunday, and Emma cherished those calls. The church bell began to chime, its deep tones marking 6 o'clock. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The sound rolled across Willowbrook, reaching every corner of the small town. In the cafe, Sarah began her closing routine. In the park, couples started making their way home. In houses throughout the town, families gathered around dinner tables. At the Riverside Inn, the town's only hotel, Mrs. Pemberton was arranging fresh flowers in the lobby. She took pride in making the inn welcoming, even though they rarely had more than a handful of guests. Tonight, there were 3 rooms occupied: a traveling salesman, a young couple on their honeymoon, and an elderly woman visiting her childhood home. Mrs. Pemberton adjusted the lilies in the vase, stepping back to admire her work. The lobby was warm and inviting, with its worn leather chairs and stone fireplace. In winter, she kept a fire burning there, and guests would gather to warm themselves and share stories. In summer, the fireplace stood empty but still dignified, a reminder of cozy nights to come. She could hear Mr. Pemberton in the kitchen, preparing dinner for their guests. He was an excellent cook, and the inn's dining room had a reputation for serving the best meals in Willowbrook. Tonight's menu featured locally sourced chicken, vegetables from Father Michael's garden, and Mrs. Pemberton's famous blackberry cobbler for dessert. Outside, the evening was deepening into twilight. The sky had transformed from amber and rose to deeper shades of purple and blue. The first stars were beginning to appear, tiny points of light in the vast expanse above. Venus was particularly bright tonight, hanging low in the western sky like a beacon. In her cottage, Margaret was making herself a simple dinner: a salad with tomatoes from her garden and a piece of grilled fish. She ate at her small kitchen table, looking out the window at her backyard, where fireflies were beginning their nightly dance. The fireflies had been abundant this year, and she never tired of watching their magical display. After dinner, she washed her single plate and glass, dried them, and put them away. Her cottage was small but perfect for one person, filled with books and memories and comfortable furniture that had molded itself to her over the years. She moved through it with the ease of long familiarity, every object in its place, every room a reflection of her quiet life. Margaret settled into her favorite armchair with a book, a mystery novel by an author she loved. But before she began reading, she simply sat for a moment, listening to the sounds of evening through her open window. A dog barking in the distance, wind rustling through leaves, the faint sound of children laughing as they played one last game before bedtime. These were the sounds of Willowbrook, the symphony of small town life. Across town, at the fire station, the volunteer firefighters were playing cards in their downstairs common room. They hoped for a quiet night, as most nights were in Willowbrook. Occasionally, they responded to a minor kitchen fire or helped rescue a cat from a tree, but major emergencies were rare. Still, they maintained their readiness, their equipment always prepared, their skills regularly practiced. Chief Patterson looked at his watch. 7:30. His shift would end at midnight, and he was looking forward to going home to his wife and sleeping in his own bed. But for now, he was content here, in this familiar place, with these familiar people, waiting in comfortable readiness. At the elementary school, janitor Robert Hayes was finishing his evening rounds. He had worked at this school for 32 years, and he knew every classroom, every hallway, every hidden corner where children liked to play. He took pride in keeping the school clean and welcoming, believing that children deserved a beautiful space in which to learn. As he mopped the hallway floors, Robert hummed softly to himself. The school was quiet now, so different from the daytime chaos of hundreds of children's voices and footsteps. He liked both versions of the building, the lively daytime school and the peaceful evening one. Each had its own character, its own particular magic. Through the classroom windows, Robert could see the town settling into night. Lights were on in houses now, warm rectangles of gold against the darkness. He could imagine the scenes behind those windows, families finishing dinner, children being tucked into bed, adults settling in for an evening of reading or television or quiet conversation. Back at the cafe, Sarah had finished closing up. She locked the door, tested it twice as she always did, and began her walk home. She lived above the town's hardware store in a small apartment that suited her perfectly. The walk took her through the now dark town square, past the quietly bubbling fountain, and the sleeping pigeons roosted in the eaves of the town hall. Sarah didn't mind walking alone at night in Willowbrook. The town was safe, the streets familiar, and there was something peaceful about moving through the darkness. Part of the night, but separate from it, an observer of the town's evening transformation. When she reached her apartment, she climbed the stairs slowly, tired but satisfied. It had been a good day. Tomorrow would bring its own rhythm, its own small dramas and quiet joys. But for now, she was ready to rest. She made herself a cup of herbal tea, changed into comfortable clothes, and settled onto her small balcony. From here, she could see a good portion of Willowbrook spread out below her. She could see the church steeple, dark against the star-filled sky. She could see the lights of houses and street lamps. She could see the outline of the hills beyond the town, darker shapes against the dark sky. A gentle breeze stirred her hair, carrying with it the scents of night, cut grass and flowers and the mineral smell of the fountain's water. Sarah sipped her tea and let herself simply be, requiring nothing of this moment except what it freely offered. In the Wilson house on Maple Street, the family had finished dinner and the children were being readied for bed. 8-year-old Tommy was protesting that it was still light outside, that summer meant staying up late, that all his friends got to stay up later than him. His mother listened patiently to these familiar arguments, then gently but firmly guided him toward the bathroom for teeth brushing. Tommy's sister, 5-year-old Grace, was already in her pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit and waiting for story time. This was her favorite part of the day, when her father would read to her from one of her many picture books. Tonight, she had chosen a story about a little mouse who went on adventures. Mr. Wilson settled into the rocking chair in Grace's room, the little girl curled up in his lap. He opened the book and began to read, his voice soft and rhythmic. Grace's eyes began to droop even before the mouse in the story had left his home. The day had been full of playing and learning and growing, and now her small body was ready for rest. Next door, Emma was preparing for bed as well. She moved through her evening routine with the practiced ease of decades, washing her face, brushing her teeth, changing into her nightgown, checking that all the doors were locked. Thomas had always done this final check, walking through the house each night, trying each door and window. Now, Emma did it, maintaining this small ritual, feeling somehow that it kept a connection to him. Before getting into bed, Emma stood at her bedroom window, looking out at Maple Street. The street was quiet now, most houses dark, or showing only a few lighted windows. Mr. Peterson's roses were invisible in the darkness, but she knew they were there, their blooms closed for the night, waiting for tomorrow's sun. Emma climbed into bed, arranged her pillows just so, and turned off her bedside lamp. The darkness was complete for a moment, and then her eyes adjusted, finding the faint glow of starlight through her curtains. She lay still, listening to her house settle around her, all its familiar creaks and sighs. This house had sheltered her for so long, had witnessed so much of her life. It felt like an old friend. At the Riverside Inn, the last lights in the dining room were being turned off. The young honeymoon couple had retired to their room, walking hand in hand up the stairs, their faces glowing with happiness. The elderly woman visiting her childhood home had spent an hour after dinner walking through the town, visiting places she remembered from 70 years ago. She had been surprised by how much had stayed the same, how the essential character of Willowbrook remained unchanged despite the passing decades. Now she too was in her room, sitting by the window, looking out at the night. She had grown up in a house on this very street, had played in the park and learned to swim in the river, and attended the elementary school. She had left Willowbrook as a young woman, seeking adventure and opportunity in distant cities. She had found both, had lived a full and interesting life. But now, in her 80s, she had felt a pull to return, to see this place one more time, to remember the girl she had been in these peaceful streets. Tomorrow, she would visit her childhood home, would knock on the door and ask the current owners if she might look around. She hoped they would say yes. She wanted to stand in the kitchen where her mother had baked bread every Saturday, wanted to see the bedroom where she had dreamed her childhood dreams. But for tonight, this view from the inn window was enough, this quiet observation of the town that had shaped her. In the town library, though it was locked and empty, something stirred, not a person, but rather the accumulated presence of all the stories housed within its walls. Thousands of books stood silent on their shelves, each one a doorway to another world, another time, another way of being. By day, people opened these doors, stepped through them, and returned changed in ways both large and small. By night, the books rested, their stories intact, waiting. The town itself was like this, Emma sometimes thought as she lay in her bed, hovering on the edge of sleep. Willowbrook was a story, and everyone who lived here was both reader and character. They shaped the story even as the story shaped them. Each day added new pages, new small events that accumulated into the longer narrative of a life, a family, a community. Sleep was coming to Willowbrook, arriving house by house, person by person. The firefighters at the station dozed in their chairs, still ready to respond if needed. Margaret closed her book, the mystery unsolved, content to save it for another evening. Daniel Cooper checked on Lily one last time, finding her fast asleep, her arms spread wide, her face peaceful. Earlier, she had made him promise to let her ride her bike again tomorrow, and he had promised, marveling at her enthusiasm, her absolute certainty that tomorrow would be wonderful. The church bell chimed again, marking 10 o'clock. Its tones rang out over the sleeping town, over the dark houses and quiet streets, over the park and the river and the hills beyond. The sound seemed to bless the town, to acknowledge its existence and affirm its continuance. Tomorrow this bell would ring again, and the day after that, and the day after that, measuring time in ancient tones, connecting this night to all the nights before and all the nights to come. In her bed, Emma heard the bell and counted the chimes, a habit so ingrained she did it without thinking. 10 o'clock, a reasonable hour. She settled more deeply into her pillows, pulling her blanket up to her chin. Through her window came the slightest breeze, cool and fresh, carrying the scent of night and growing things. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Thomas, as it often was. Not a sad thought, but a grateful one. They had had such good years together, had built a life in this town, in this house, on this street. She missed him terribly, but she was not lonely. The memories were too vivid, too present. And besides, she had this town, these neighbors, this community that had held her all these years. Sarah, in her apartment above the hardware store, had turned off all her lights except for one small lamp beside her bed. She was reading, but her attention kept drifting to the sounds of the night. A car passing slowly by, someone laughing in the distance, a dog barking once and then falling silent. These were the sounds of safety, of home, of a place where life moved at a human pace. She set down her book, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness embrace her. She thought about the day just past, about Mr. Jameson and his apple pie, about Timothy and his science homework, about all the small interactions that had filled her hours. Nothing remarkable had happened, and yet the day had been full, had been good. Margaret, in her cottage, had also turned off her lights. She lay in her bed, a lifetime of accumulated comfort and familiarity surrounding her. She thought about the children she had read to that morning, their eager faces and endless questions. She thought about the generations of children who had passed through the library, who had learned to love reading there, who had discovered whole worlds between covers of books. Tomorrow she would open the library again, would welcome whoever came through its doors. Perhaps it would be busy, perhaps quiet. It didn't matter. The library was there, constant and reliable, a repository not just of books, but of the town's intellectual life, its curiosity, its desire to learn and grow and understand. Throughout Willowbrook, people were settling into sleep. Dreams were beginning to form, gentle dreams born of peaceful days and secure nights. Children dreamed of games and adventures. Adults dreamed of memories and hopes. The elderly dreamed of long lives lived, of loves and losses, and the continuing thread of existence. The town itself seemed to breathe, a living thing made up of all these sleeping souls. The streets lay empty under the stars. The fountain continued its quiet bubbling, never stopping, never resting. The river flowed past the edge of town, its ancient course unchanged, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow comforting in its permanence. The night deepened. Midnight came and went, marked by the church bell's 12 solemn chimes. The firefighters changed shifts. A few late workers made their way home, their footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalks. A cat prowled through someone's backyard, intent on mysterious feline business. And still, Willowbrook slept, wrapped in darkness and silence, safe and sound. Tomorrow the sun would rise again, and the town would wake, and the day's small dramas would unfold. But for now, in these deep hours of night, there was only rest and peace. Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, pulled her blanket closer, and settled again. Sarah rolled over, seeking a cooler spot on her pillow. Margaret, ever a light sleeper, half woke at some small sound, identified it as nothing important, and slipped back into dreams. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, following their ancient paths. The moon, a waning crescent, cast its silver light over everything. The rooftops and gardens, the church steeple and the town square, the sleeping people and the quiet streets. It was a light that had shone on countless such evenings, had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, and yet still seemed new each night, still seemed a blessing. In her room at the Riverside Inn, the elderly woman who had returned to visit her childhood town lay awake a while longer. She was thinking about time, about how it moves forward relentlessly and yet somehow circles back, bringing us to where we began, but changed, transformed by all the years between. She was thinking about this town that had stayed essentially itself despite all those passing years. She was thinking about how rare and precious that was, this continuity, this rootedness. Finally, she too slept, and her dreams were full of memories, of running through these streets as a child, of hot summers and cold winters, of friends long gone and moments long past, but somehow still present, still real in the landscape of memory. Tomorrow she would walk those streets again, would reconnect past and present, child and elder, then and now. The night reached its deepest point, that hour before dawn, when darkness is most complete and sleep most profound. All over Willowbrook, people rested, bodies and minds replenishing themselves, preparing for the day ahead. It was a simple thing, this nightly rest, and yet essential, part of the rhythm that sustained all life. And then, almost imperceptibly, the night began to lighten. Not yet dawn, but the first suggestion of it, a faint thinning of the darkness in the east. The stars began to fade, giving way to the coming day. Birds stirred in their nests, preparing for their dawn chorus. In her bed, Emma sensed this change without fully waking. Her sleep was lighter now, drifting toward consciousness. Soon, her alarm would ring, and she would rise, and another day would begin. But for these last few moments, she lingered in that peaceful space between sleep and waking, still embraced by rest. All over Willowbrook, this same gentle transition was occurring. Bodies were stirring, minds beginning to surface. The town was preparing to wake, to begin again, to continue its story for another day. But it did so slowly, peacefully, in keeping with its character. The church bell rang once more, marking 5 o'clock, the traditional hour of rising. But many would sleep a while longer, and that was fine. There was no rush in Willowbrook, no frantic pace. Life moved according to its own rhythm, patient and sure. Emma finally opened her eyes, looked at her ceiling, smiled slightly. Another day, another chance to tend her garden, to sit on her porch, to greet her neighbors. Another day in this town that had been her home for so long, that had held her through all her joys and sorrows. She rose slowly, put on her robe, and walked to her window. The sky was brightening now, the world emerging from darkness. Her street lay quiet still, but it would not be for long. Soon, Mr. Peterson would be out checking his roses. Soon, children would be running to catch the school bus. Soon, all the ordinary magic of an ordinary day would unfold. But for now, in these quiet moments of early morning, Willowbrook was still mostly asleep, still wrapped in the peace that night had brought. And Emma stood at her window, watching the day arrive, grateful for this place, this life, this continuing story of a small town where nothing much happened and everything that mattered could be found.